Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and so thrilled to have you joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we are talking to the wonderful Bill Heck all about his current television series, I Know What You Did Last Summer. And there's so much kind of suspense and detail, so many details that are added as the series develops. At this point,
Hmm.
I've seen the first 3 or 4 episodes, and there's still more questions being created than there are answers at this point. And obviously, I know with television, you don't always have all of the scripts and all of the details up front. And I was interested in how much of a roadmap and how much framework you had from the scripts, and then how much space you really had to work to fill in with the in between, particularly when you started filming those first couple of episodes.
Right. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the what was the real helpful connective thread that we had going in was that Sarah Goodman, the showrunner and creator, was very interested in just the personal human experience of these characters, sort of, within the genre-esque thrust of the whole thing. We wanted to make sure we were really speaking to the people's experience and had a sense of character and who they were in relation to each other. So while we were definitely missing some key plot points when we started off, I think we all had a pretty solid foundation going into it. A nice base from which to react to anything that might surprise us down the road. So as we went along, it became something of a game for us too, to kind of take it as it came. There were a few like betting pools along the way about what might happen or who might be who and what what might come out. Forget who won now. It was not me. Yeah, it was something that was a lot of fun along the way. In some ways, you're gonna see us experiencing the development of the story along with the audience will sort of experience it as we did in a way.
Yeah.
It's just sort of fun.
And
Yeah.
and I'm kind of interested in some of the conversations that you had with Sarah, particularly about those early scenes, because I was just rewatching like your first scenes in episode one and the beginning of
Hmm.
episode two, and it's so fascinating already revisiting those scenes and the recontextualization of those
Right.
moments.
Right.
And did you and Sarah talk at all about, making sure that you were playing to the real emotion of what that scene is, but also being careful not to give too much away, or was it really just about making sure you played to the scene as it needed to be, and then the contextualization naturally falls into place later?
Like you say, everyone had a nice long meeting with Sarah before anything got going, where um, she did a lot of coloring in for us about not only what was informing the scenes that we did have at that moment and the history behind it, but what we might somewhat expect down the road. A lot of it is about how your past stays with you, is inescapable, and you have to deal with it at some point. And so there was, and even the setup of the show was last summer. A lot of what's informing the action of what we're watching came from at least a year prior. The thing that happened a year prior is something that had been boiling for decades prior to that. So uh, she gave us a was um, very very intent on giving us a solid foundation from which to leap off. So the discoveries, the things we didn't know along the way, were relatively speaking fairly incidental. So in those early scenes, we had a lot of context for you know um, why we were all so deeply tortured.
And even before the events of that first episode for your character, in terms of what you were talking about with the idea of not being able to escape your past in different ways, that's already something that your character is facing and dealing with. And we're starting to get more details about his wife and the fact that she died from suicide. And clearly
Mm-hmm.
there were a lot of issues, either mental health wise for her or between the two of them, which led up to that point. Not entirely sure what those details are, but it's very clear that there
Mm-hmm.
were a lot of struggles within this family for a long time as well that they've been dealing with and grieving from. And so
Right.
how did that inform a lot of the framework of your character, particularly when it comes to the way that he handles his emotions and the way that he does kind of, he's already been in a position of having to be there for his daughters in a very particular way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's I'm not sure how much to say here, but uh, he's definitely a man who has become very practiced at um, at functioning relatively well within the framework of deep disappointment and sense of failure and shortcoming, uh, and he puts on a pretty good face. He's a positive, contributing member of the community. He he's sort of the people. He owns the cafe. He's on the town council. He's a easygoing surfer dad. But so he's practiced at what he's had to really hold it together in the face of some really upsetting circumstances for a long time. Then we see some additionally upsetting circumstances occur, and it all begins to crack. It can only one person can only kind of hold so much before the seams start to show. So that's sort of part of the fun of it. Like, when you really get to lose control, and consider who you think you are, or who you think you're supposed to be, versus the actuality of yourself.
Yeah. And kind of as an extension of that as well, he comes across as someone who, I think to the points that you were just making, is very good at keeping his emotions close to his chest when he needs to. And did you think that the framework of that was a necessity that he's developed as a skill set from some of the things that he has dealt with in recent years? Or did you think of him as someone where that's kind of always been his persona, and he's always been a little bit more introverted with his emotions and what he lets out and reveals to people around him at times?
It's definitely something that started long ago. I think I don't think it's too spoilery to say that the years prior to the start of the show, he's had to do that for the sake of his daughters, sort of, show good face to make them feel that he is a solid father and he's there and everything's okay. And we join them at a point where maybe they're starting to have to do that together. Is that vague enough? I don't know.
It is. It's a very delicate dance that you're playing, and you're doing it so well.
Definitely his daughter begins to see the upsetting underbelly before the rest of the community, in a way that they have to deal with as a family. And then that only holds for so long.
Yeah. And as a parent, obviously every parent always has unique individual relationships with each of their kids that bring out different dynamics and different sides, both sides of them as well. And as the parent of two twins who have kind of vivaciously different personalities as well, how did you want to shape the foundation of what these relationships look like, both with him as a parent to them as twin daughters, but also kind of the different individual nuances of what each dynamic is with the two of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think he hasn't let himself admit that he treats them very differently. I think he feels that he does genuinely love them the same in many ways. They're very different people, as you said, and so the expression of how that love, the way that love is expressed, is maybe different from one to the other. I think because he is a man who is sitting on a lot of stuff, he's good at being easy around easy people. And I think people are more difficult, like maybe one of his daughters frightens him in a way because it would require more of him than he feels equipped to give. And so, perhaps he's a little more careful with her, and that of course affects her perception about how he feels about her, and the dynamic of their relationship moving forward, and any resentment between the kids. But there's a lot of that thing where, as a parent, you can be a really well-rounded individual, even, which this guy may not be, but you can do your best, and you're fated to fuck something up with your kids, right? Unintentionally. So, I don't know that he thinks he's doing fine, and he's having to come to terms with the fact that he maybe didn't do so fine.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
speaking of details that he kind of keeps to himself, I don't even know if relationship is the right word to describe it, but he's been in this very on again, off again, undefinable relationship that he hasn't told his daughters about either.
Hmm.
And I was interested in kind of where you saw whether you saw the fact that he has kept this completely hidden from his daughters as being to do with the dynamic between him and his partner, or whether it was really something where he's just kind of always felt a need to shield that side of his life as as he started to date after the loss of their mother.
Yeah. I think it's maybe a bit of both. I think he feels protective of what's his, wants some space for himself. I think that the trauma of the wife's suicide, how it affected him, he doesn't want to show that to the girls. The way that maybe manifests in his current romantic life, he's protective of. Uh, he also is, I think, wanting to protect the girls from, thinking he's betraying their mother, or uh, he's got reasons to, because the nature of his romance is sort of cyclical and how committed it is between the two of them. Um, I think he tells himself he doesn't want to go to the girls about it until it's something solid, but it's more of the same kind of hiding from what's actually required and what's actually going on. He's convincing himself he's doing the right thing, but maybe he just doesn't have the balls to face what's required in the moment. I don't know.
And there is a moment where one of his daughters finds out about this relationship. And did you see
Mhm.
that as an opportunity to slightly open up the relationship that he has with his daughter, and to kind of for him to be more comfortable showing different sides of himself because of that?
Yeah, and before she finds out, even he talks about letting the girls know. It's been going on long enough at this point that I think, especially the recent trauma, it's working conversely in a way that is making him want to shut some things really far down, but deciding that maybe he wants to open some other things up. And so, uh, the trauma he and his daughter recently experienced together throws them into a more intimate relationship just of necessity. And he does try and turn that into a truer intimacy, more of a father-daughter connection than he maybe feels comfortable doing at the moment. But guy's doing his best.
And jumping into spoiler territory in kind of one of the moments in episode 2, not season 2, I wanted to talk about the moment where his daughter does come home and tell him about the car accident that's happened, because firstly, there's the moment where he just looks at her and says her name, and that feels like a
Mm-hmm.
very important detail in of itself. But also, again, kind of talking about his emotional fabric as a character, there's a myriad of ways in which you could have played that scene, even with the text written as it is, on an
Mm-hmm.
emotional level. And was it easy to find where that emotional landscape was going to be for him as a character? Because there's so many different complexities with everything that he's processing, both in terms of his own emotions of the situation, and then also just being there as a parent and having to think logistically for someone else as well.
Right. Yeah. I think when it first lands, that's the most immediate thing he has to process. I think he can't. He definitely has to go through a moment where he feels that grief, and it's immediate in the immediate way that it exists. And I think she pretty quickly turns it into a situation where he has to act on her behalf. Again, I don't know how specific we can get, but she wants to go to the police. I say, don't. It's uh, again, it's sort of the thrown together by necessity. He's like, maybe technically you should be going to jail, or if you do what may be the right thing, you're going to go to jail. And then I've lost two daughters tonight, and I'm not willing to accept that. Um, and then over the course of that episode, you see him take it in hand and uh, do what he knows best to do in the moment to protect his daughter. Um, in a way that maybe completely ruins her life. But it's the best he can come up with in the moment.
It's also interesting that we get to see not just what that moment plays out to be in that particular scene. But throughout the season, we're also seeing, what happened at that point and where are these characters a year afterwards.
Hmm.
And so, how did you want him to feel about those decisions like a year in? Did you want it to feel like something where he's on solid ground with the choice that he makes because he knows that that was kind of the only option for him in the moment? Or did you want him to be in a space of constantly having been questioning whether he could have done things differently?
I think he tends more toward um, accepting the decision he made, and but I don't know that there's a moment where he directly regrets it, but he very quickly discovers how difficult it is to hold together, and it's there's a real kind of prolonged, low-toned panic that he'll be found out or she'll be taken away or it's all going to blow up. They have figured out something that's worked, but it's mostly worked. She's been out of town for a year, and it's been easy to maintain. And now she's back with her friends in the community, and all eyes are on the two of them, whether they fully realize it or not, whether the eyes fully realize it at first or not. But they are, um, the hot interrogation light is hanging over them, and it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. Um, so I think he starts to really feel that acutely, and he doubles down because also, and again, I don't know with how much territory we are into spoiler wise, but it's the the fabricated truth they have to move forward with is also contains other lies that he's held on to for a long time that his daughter is even unaware of. And so not only is he holding up this one particular house of cards that he's built a year prior, but it's actually just like a smaller house of cards on top of this other larger house of cards he's been fashioning through the last couple decades. So he's in trouble.
That idea of the pressure cooker situation, from the fact that it is a small, very tight knit community, and this is a place where you imagine that he's raised his daughters there since birth, and so
Mm-hmm.
everybody's known his kids since they were babies, and that speaks to longevity of his relationship dynamics with everybody,
Right.
and with everything that you were saying earlier, where he is an active participant in this community as well, and so outside of the impact that this has on his relationship with his daughter, how for you did then that reconfigure and reshape a lot of the dynamics that you have with a lot of the supporting cast? Because even if it's someone that he's just seeing from time to time, like you said, he's still having to keep this house of cards intact at every moment that he steps
Right.
outside of his front door.
Yeah. I mean, this is speaks a bit to how I think how it's a really smart decision to set it in Hawaii, because it's this true paradise. I mean, that's the first time I had been when we were shooting, and it completely lived up to every expectation I had. It's a genuinely incredible place, unspeakably beautiful, and deeply isolated. Uh, I never felt the island fever that some people really hate being there for very long. It's shocking how truly separate it is, and you're really stuck there. And so it really effectively reflects this kind of patina of ease and beauty that he projects or tries to project. But meanwhile, he's completely held hostage by his own circumstances, and there's really the only road out is a long swim where you're likely to drown. Uh, um, so that definitely affects everything. This community that at one point is a great support is in some ways his greatest adversary. How well known he is, or how well known he thinks he is, or people think he is, and what a shadow, in fact, he happens to be.
Did filming on location there really create a lot of intimacy in terms of the dynamic that then was shaped between the cast and crew? Just because, especially when you're on location for anything, it always kind of really influences a lot of the atmosphere on set. But then for this, you've got the added layer that you're in such an immersive location specific to what you're filming as well.
Yeah. Uh, yes and no, in the sense that yes, being away on location with everyone, you definitely feel singular purpose, and there are a few other distractions to pull you away from that. Also, we were started in January of this year, and there were no tourists at all. We were in the depth of the COVID isolation, and so the island was very empty and ours in a way that I think most mainlanders don't get to experience. Um, uh, so um, and because work had just started back up, we all felt very fortunate and really embracing it. On the other hand, the majority of the central cast is notably younger than I am, and so I think they had a much more. Everyone was lovely, but I had my family with me, and they were off doing their young 20-year-olds, late teens things, and I was happy with my family. We're going snorkeling and exploring beaches and such. So it was there was just enough connection that it served what the circumstances were, but also enough isolation from it that I was able to experience that factor of it as well, feeling like an island under myself within the island, the larger island. So it kind of was a perfect balance, I think.
Because obviously with the way sets have changed so much, there's been a lot less opportunity, even more so than there was before, to have rehearsals and to have time on set, really just with everybody hanging out and having conversations. Have you found that there's been a shift for you in having to think about the way that you work, and having to approach scenes a lot more instinctively in terms of finding the emotional dynamic and beats of a scene?
Um, there are enough protocols in place that I think cast to cast, you feel fairly connected and still relatively able to explore in the way you need to. Um, it does get really, everybody on set is masked, and if they're close to you as a cast member, shielded. And there are people I spent 4 months straight with whose faces I have never seen. Like most of the crew and people there, I probably wouldn't be able to recognize on the street. So it is it's a good kind of paradox for a show like this, I think, because it's not quite right. Definitely something feels a bit off. You're building these connections, and everyone on this crew was particularly lovely, I found, and of singular purpose. Uh, but you really do feel a bit at sea. You don't feel like you're ever fully tethered in a way that once maybe you would have.
And kind of jumping back to the emotional framework of your character a little bit more, because with that idea that we're seeing him in present day and the past, and there is there's gradual cracks that are just appearing more and more, and there is more seeping out in terms of what other people are seeing and his emotional vulnerability. Did you find it easy to navigate in finding, okay, he's always held on to this, but for this particular reason it's a slight tipping point for him, now he's willing to or unable to hold this in anymore, and just
Mm-hmm.
really finding that kind of gentle journey so that no moment feels unexpected or overblown, or kind of like it's too much within the performance and that beat as well?
Yeah, and that's a credit to Sarah and the rest of the writers who took great care to try and ground whatever excesses the genre may call for in a kind of emotional truth for the characters. Not because they're doing anyone a favor, because it actually makes it far more harrowing and scary, I think, if it's connected to like actual real world circumstances that make it easier for perhaps the audience to imagine, and certainly cost the character more than just a jump scare or something.
And then lastly, I just wanted to ask you something about your preparation when you're doing theater roles, because you've mentioned a little bit in the past about how you have a really solid foundation at this point in how you prepare for theater characters and some of the work that you do. But then obviously every single role or performance asks for something a little bit different. And I was interested about what is that foundation that you really feel the necessity to have, that kind of works no matter what the type of production is, what the type of character is, and then where are the spaces that you tend to go into different directions.
Yeah, I mean, even within the theater, it is a very sort of gig to gig individual experience. You really have to figure out your process all over again in some ways. Uh, this one in particular all happened very fast. And as we discussed earlier, we only knew so much going in, and so there was a lot of trust in Sarah and each other that we had enough to build on, in a very kind of a specific way. That, you know, something that helps me key in from the beginning is trying to figure out like where the character carries their tension, sort of where their sadness, not nothing, but you know, like where they're holding on in their lives, or not. You know, if it's a freer character, this guy definitely is holding on to some things. So, but it does a nice a nice little subconscious thing if you locate that, sort of, I don't know, it's just an easy way in to discovering how a person might move through the world. And you know, especially coming from the theater where your body is the tool of expression and stuff, to be able to concentrate that in a way that makes you feel your body in one specific way. So if you feel like you're losing your way, you can at least key back in with that, and maybe it'll help reveal something. But this one was very sort of skin of the teeth, which was enjoyable. Sometimes that is a terrible, terrible feeling. But I think we all had a good trust with Sarah and each other going forward, that it was manageable.
I absolutely love the idea of that being kind of the central genesis with the idea of where the tension stems from. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be fascinated watching the rest of the season to see where it stems from in all different ways for this character.
Right.
And just want to say thank you so much for such a lovely conversation, Bill.
Thank you, Mara. Really appreciate it.